When it comes to spring bass fishing, a lot of anglers struggle to catch numbers and size of bass, especially if you're fishing from the bank. Well, old Lowbrow's got a few tricks up his sleeve that work year in and year out to help me catch tons of bass every single time I head to the lake. Stick around, we're going to talk all about it. Right there at the boat. Ooh, crud, that's a good one. Oh, that's a good one. Oh, that's a good one. Come here. Welcome back to Lowbrow Fishing. And it's that time of year again where we start talking about the pre-spawn, the spawn, and the post-spawn. It doesn't matter what part of the country that you live in. It doesn't matter if you have a good blanket of snow on the ground and hard water on your lakes, or if you're down in South Florida already enjoying the warm weather. The pre-spawn is about to happen or is happening in your area. And it can be either a boom or a bust depending on how you fish it. It's one of the most important parts of bass fishing all year long. And it can really set the tone for the rest of the year, depending on how you approach it, especially if you are struggling. Now, if you're a bank angler, I want you to pay particular attention, because the pre-spawn doesn't mean the fish are out of reach. As a matter of fact, it's a lot like the fall feed, where those bass are going to be a lot more shallow in spots than you think they are. But we need to approach the pre-spawn, the spawn, and the post-spawn in a certain way. And once you begin to look at it in a certain way, it becomes much more clear, and finding and targeting those bass becomes much easier. But before we get started, if you like bass fishing content that tries to include everyone, whether you're a boat angler or whether you're footing it from the bank, and always with a focus on budget, because not everybody's got a bunch of money to spend on bass fishing gear, that I'm asking you to click that subscribe button. This is the channel for you. And while you're down there, give this video a like. I would really appreciate it. So when I say that the pre-spawn and all the way through the post-spawn needs to be looked at in a certain way, what do I mean? Well, you have to think about it as a wave. It goes in and it comes back out. And it flows just like that, year in and year out. And it's unyielding and inevitable, just like the tide. It doesn't matter what happens with the conditions around us. That water's going to get warmer, it's going to get cooler, it's going to get warmer, it's going to get cooler. That's the nature of spring, right? Those days are very different from one another. We can have a warm day one day, and then the next day, like today, it can be down in the low 40s. And then tomorrow, back up in the upper 70s with no wind at all. That's how spring is. But those bass, they can't rely on that. They've still got to do what nature intended for them to do, and that is reproduce, which means there's three phases to it. The first part, the pre-spawn, they're moving up from out deep, and they're feeding up. They're coming from all over the lake to those old traditional breeding grounds that they've used for generations. And then we have the spawn itself, which is where the males go. They dig out the beds, and they try to entice a female, who then comes, lay their eggs, and then they leave, where the male is guarding those young fry, the new of the year. And then after that, we've got the post-spawn, when all of it is over and those bass are heading back out into deeper water to set up for their summer cycle. So once you understand that wave, and you understand it goes in and sort of crashes and then comes back out, it becomes much easier to see and be able to predict exactly what those bass are doing. So right now, we're in the beginning part. We are in the pre-spawn. South Mississippi, we don't have much longer for the pre-spawn before the spawn starts kicking in. Last time out, I was seeing those buck males starting to make some beds. So we're getting pretty close. The spawn itself will be kicking into high gear really, really soon. And it's over by the end of March here. We don't get but from late February until late March. That's normally when our spawn is. But when we're talking about the pre-spawn and we're wondering, where are those bass at? How am I locating them? How am I targeting them? Well, as I said, think about it in terms of a wave. Those bass are going out and they're coming back in. So look for those traditional pockets where they make those beds. Look for those areas. And those bass will be all around there. At the beginning of the pre-spawn, they're going to be at the very beginning of those pockets or those creek arms or those bays or what have you. That's where those bass are going to be. Look for cover and structure, especially structure and how that cover relates to that structure. Say you got a hump at the mouth of that creek arm, right? Or a saddle off of a main lake point at the beginning of that creek arm. And then you've got cover around it, a rock pile or some hydrilla. That's going to be one of the prime places that I'm going to start looking. That's the idea of it. I want to go back to where those bass are traditionally spawning. I want to find the opening of that creek arm or that back pocket or what have you, the ditch or anything else, a hydrilla flat, anything that those bass are using to spawn in year after year. And you know they're going to be going back to shallower water. Now, they may not be in dirt, mud, shallow water, just a few inches, but they're going to be shallower. And for the most part, they're going to be within a cast distance from the bank. Now, as a bank angler, that's the key. Those bass are always going to be within striking distance. The key is you have to move. And I hear this from bank anglers all the time. Lowbrow, there's no fish where I'm fishing. Well, then move. You have 2 feet. Move. Walk around to where there are other spots that you can cast from. I've said use Google Earth. Use Google Earth to look at your fishery, whatever fisheries you like to use, whether it's a river, whether it's a lake, whether it's a man-made impoundment, whether it's a coastline. It doesn't matter. Look at Google Earth. And a lot of times you'd be surprised at how many more fishing spots just on one fishery that you can find, which gives you more opportunities. You don't have to stay in one spot and try to fish. If you know those bass are going to be off of a main lake point, right? Or they're going to be set up on a brush pile on the other side of the lake, then walk there. A lot of times it's a lot easier than you think it is. So sometimes you are just going to have to move. But they're always going to be at the mouth of those traditional spawning areas. Now, a lot of times they may be out toward the middle. It's going to fluctuate. Like I said, it's like a wave, and it's going to oscillate like a wave. Let's say we have some warm days that come through, and those bass are really busting on shad. They're really chasing those bait fish, and they're right near the bank. They're 20, 30 feet from the bank, if not closer, and you can see them rolling and busting and just going after that bait. Well, say we have a cold front come through. Those bass are not necessarily going to leave that area. As a matter of fact, they're not going to leave that area. They may drift down into a little bit deeper water. They may drift down just a little bit, but they're still going to be in that general area. And they're going to edge ever closer to the back part of that pocket until the spawning process begins, with the big females holding back. They're the ones that are going to be holding back while the buck males go in, build the beds, and try to entice the females. They go in, lay their eggs, and then they come back out. And then the entire process goes in reverse. That wave comes back out, and we move from the post-spawn and into the summer pattern. So a lot of these techniques are going to be effective for the next couple of months. All you have to do is find those traditional spawning pockets, look for areas around the mouth up into the middle area of that spawning pocket, and target those. It can be a dock. It can be a rock pile. And I'm telling you, those bass are going to be stacked on those areas. And you will catch way more fish than you think that you possibly could. Now, when it comes to the baits that I'm using, well, there's usually 2 different types of ways we can approach this, right? There's going fast, and then there's going finesse. Now, everybody knows, I've talked about it a million times, I'm generally starting with topwater, usually a spook or other type of walking bait. This allows me to cover water and identify just exactly where those hot spots are, because you're going to find 20, 30, 40 or more bass stacked up in one little area. And usually, for most of the year, if you find a dink in that area, you're going to keep catching dinks out of that area. This time of year, not so much. This time of year, you will find different sizes of bass mingling with each other as you get some of those bigger sow females and some of those young bucks, the male bucks, together in one area. But you will, use this use something like a walking bait, something to cover water, something like a whopper plopper, something like a buzz bait. And that's what I'm using when I'm starting, because I like to start with top water. And it doesn't really matter what the conditions are. I don't care if it's sunny. I don't care if it's cloudy. I don't care if there's wave action on the water. The action of the waves on the water will basically determine how aggressively I'm going to go after it, right? I will use a walking bait if we've got some chop. But if it gets really, really choppy, then chances are I'm going to switch more to like a buzz bait or even a wake bait, especially those new larger speed wakes from 6th Sense that I've gotten that I really like. Now, a lot of guys, well, they are so-called traditionalists, and there's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with that, right? A red lipless crank. You got to go with red, and you got to go with something like a lipless crank. And this Strike King Red Eye Shad, this is a great choice. They love throwing these in the pre-spawn in the early part of the spring because the theory is that the crawfish have just molted and they're bright red, and this gives the bass a great target. Now, you know, I have this one here. Now, I like this one better. This is a 6th Sense. This is a Quake, and this is a great little lipless crank. This is just something that I've had a lot of success on. It's become more of a comfort bait to me. It's worked very well for me. I've been able to catch some really nice fish working it. And a lot of guys will go with something like a square bill, right? Like this Berkeley Wild thing. You know, this is a great little square bill. It's a smaller size square bill. It's got that red color, or even, you know, something like this Strike King Hybrid Hunter. This Strike King Hybrid Hunter has been pretty effective for me during situations, but I've talked about it before. I don't use red because I'm imitating the crawfish. I'm using red for a completely different reason, and baits like this allow me to exploit that, and that is red is extremely visible underwater, but only for the first few feet, and then it tends to dissipate really quickly. And bass, their eyes are made to see red very well. Now, that's why I'm using it, because that color stands out. Not necessarily because I'm trying to imitate a newly molted craw. In that shallower water that I'm fishing, say less than 10 feet, a lot of times there's a lot of wave action, there's a lot of wind action, and there's a lot of rain, which stains up that water. So baits like that tend to stand out in that shallower water, and that's why I'm using them. It allows me to cover water, and it allows me to locate those hot spots. Now, once I do find those hot spots, or if I already know where those bass are, a lot of times I'm going to switch to something like a fluke, because I want to be varied, because those bass will get burnt out on a lot of those lures a lot quickly than you think they will, especially if you've got a lot of anglers in the area and a lot of people throwing the same things like red crankbaits. This can be a great way to entice bass, because it takes bass longer to get accustomed to something like this. Something that looks natural, something that doesn't make a lot of noise, something that blends in to what it is they're already chasing. And of course, stick baits and trick worms on a Waco rig, on a wacky rig, and on a NACO rig. But I really like them on a wacky rig and a Waco rig. That's where these are really going to shine for me. I can work those areas again with finesse and have a lot better chance of not triggering those bass and having them tune out to what it is that I'm throwing. You'd be surprised. Bass get attuned to what you're throwing really quickly. So cover water, locate those hot spots, and then use a finesse presentation, you know, something in that mid water column range. Even a drop shot can be an effective technique if that's what you want to use. But give those a try, and I'm telling you, you're going to have way more success than you ever thought that you could have. So there you have it. An easy, simple approach to early spring and pre-spawn bass fishing. It's not that hard. And once you understand how the process works and what it is every single year, you'll be able to locate those bass, not just on your fishery, but on any fishery, and turn it into a bonanza that you look forward to every single year. Thanks for watching Lowbrow Fishing. We'll catch you in the next one.